Welcome to my 256th video on my work with OO gauge. This video will feature the product of a slightly unusual purchase that I made on eBay UK. A complete boxed mainline train set from 1980. As I started to sort things out and to take images for use in this video, I realized that there was probably too much involved to cover in one video without getting ridiculously long. So in this video I'll be covering unboxing, details of what was included, and a full review of the included Mainline 1980 catalogue. More details on the included rolling stock will have to wait for a future video, hopefully with some running. I may or may not attempt to build the included card station kit at some point, and I may or may not attempt to actually try to set out the included track and controller and try them out at some point. First things first, I don't normally bother to show how things actually arrive on my doorstep, but in this case I did actually photograph the package before I tried to open it, as it was rather extraordinary, the largest package I've ever received in the way of model railway stuff. Here's a picture of the package with an OO gauge Ginty for scale. Shipping from the UK to Canada cost me £41 and 5p. Which for once didn't seem all that unreasonable given the size and weight. I also had to pay £20 and 47p in import charges, so with the purchase price of £135, I paid $350 Canadian in all. Which leaves me at the moment quite happy with the purchase, although I haven't actually tried to check the degree to which things work. Here are the contents of the package after I first extracted them. The size of the package didn't lie at all about the size of the contents. There was no padding as such at all. The set box was just wrapped in garbage bag plastic and then in cardboard, and the catalogue instructions and card kit parts were in a paper envelope on top of the main set box. Here you can see something that intrigued me about this set. It apparently comes with unique electronic steam sound, from a realistic hiss to the characteristic chuff-chuff. If that actually works, it will be something quite interesting. I'm assuming from this write-up that we're talking here of something considerably more sophisticated than the little sandpaper scrapers that were used to produce steam sound on some older models. I had never heard of this mainline electronic steam sound system, and I'm really hoping that it will actually work so that I can check it out. Here's the other end of the box top. This is a complete set, including an oval of track, a controller, a re-railer, and additional items such as a level crossing with gates, parts for card station buildings and platforms, and even crew figures for the locomotive. Also included was a copy of the 1980 Mainline catalogue, and I'll show you all of the contents of that shortly. This is probably an opportune time to say a little about the general history of Mainline OO gauge models. Most of you are probably somewhat familiar with Mainline models. They don't exactly have the best reputation, as pretty much all of their locos use the split chassis system with central plastic sections to the axles to isolate the wheels on either side. That system led to a lot of problems. The plastic axle parts tend to crack and split, and short circuits will sometimes develop between the two chassis halves. And there are other potential problems. Mainline used motors built into the chassis in a rather awkward way, and plastic drive gears that were not of very good quality, so that they tended to wear badly and fail to engage properly. And they also used plastic inserts in the centre of the loco driving wheels to represent the coloured spokes, and those inserts tend to swell and warp over time, causing operating problems. On the other hand, mainline models were, for their time, probably above average in representing accurate, detailed scale modelling of their prototypes. Mainline models were marketed by Palitoy, a division of the American General Mills Corporation, better known for things such as breakfast cereals. The range was introduced at the start of 1976, at the same time that Airfix introduced their OO gauge railway models. The models relied on plastic moulding for the bodies, with manufacturing in Hong Kong. In 1981, Airfix went into receivership and Palitoy took over the Airfix model railway range. However, just 2 years later, in 1983, General Mills decided to cease all production of mainline model railways, and sales finally ceased in 1985. What happened to the tooling of the models was rather complex. Palitoy actually never owned the tooling for their models. They contracted tooling out to another company in the Far East, which maintained ownership of the tooling. On the other hand, Airfix did own their tooling, but Palitoy passed that tooling on to another company in the Far East when they took over the Airfix model railways. I can't really decipher all that happened, but it seems that most, if not all, of the mainline tooling ended up with Bachmann, whereas most, if not all, of the Airfix tooling ended up with Dapol. The principal locomotives of interest to me, such as the Royal Scot and Jubilee, went to Bachmann, who continued to produce the models for many years. Bachmann kept the split chassis system, always for the Royal Scots, for example, and for a long time for the Jubilees, but they did improve the mechanisms of the models, fitting better motors and more robust drive gears. Moving on, a single folded sheet of instructions was included with my set. Here you can see one side of that sheet showing how to set up track and connect power and how to use the rather strange re-railer. And here's the other side of that sheet with more on track setup and some info on the rather odd controller. Also included with the set were a whole bunch of sheets of card parts for station buildings and platforms. These were apparently included with the set when it was originally sold. I didn't get any instructions for these card kits as such, apart from what is written on the part sheets themselves, and I really have no way of knowing whether the kits are complete, although it appears that they may well be. Back to the catalogue. This is the 1980 edition, so I think it pretty much represents most of what Mainline sold, apart from the Airfix stuff, which wasn't taken over until just a bit later. Here's the contents page of that catalogue, with more info on the steam sound system. Apparently the sound module is installed in the locomotive tender and requires a battery to operate. I wasn't familiar with the PP3 designation, but that apparently refers to what we know as standard 9-volt batteries, which is a bit odd, as I wouldn't have thought that such a battery would fit into a tender. Anyway, we shall have to see. It sounds to me as though this system might be somewhat similar to something more modern that I've tried in the past, battery-driven sound modules that sit in rolling stock and emit different sounds based on vibration, etc. I didn't really find those very useful, as the volume produced was low and the sounds weren't very appropriate. Here's the next page with details on the Royal Scot loco, which I believe would be the one included in my set. This is an as-preserved model, which I normally wouldn't run, as it represents the Royal Scot as rebuilt after World War II, with a tapered boiler and a double chimney, and I prefer to model LMS operations in the 1930s when my granddad was still driving for them, including driving Royal Scots. Mainline did produce models of the Royal Scot class in its original form with the parallel boiler and single chimney, and I have several examples of those. Hornby and Airfix only ever made rebuilt Scots. The only other source for 00 gauge ready-to-run unrebuilt Scots is the tooling done for Wren, and examples of that are somewhat rare and expensive, but I do have 2 Wren Royal Scots, one of which is converted for 3-rail running. Several kits of the Royal Scot have been available over time, and I also have a couple of kit-built examples. On with the Mainline catalogue. Pictures of a variety of locos here, and some info on other items, such as the card building kits, the somewhat odd controller, and the unique re-railer. That one still puzzles me a bit. I shall have to try and see how it's supposed to work. The next page illustrates a station built from card, apparently intended to go against curved track, along with a controller and, I assume, the re-railer, and the rolling stock of the branch freight set is shown. apparently a pre-grouping set with a loco in northeastern livery. Here's the page for the diesel freight set, not really my thing. It seems that it was pretty much standard for the mainline sets to include a card station kit along with the track, controller and re-railer. And here's another set, a Great Western freight set, this time including a level crossing, as does my set. An express freight set with a Jubilee in BR livery. And the express passenger set that I bought. Another diesel set, the Master Cutler. I don't quite understand the connection with making tableware, which is presumably what a cutler would do, isn't it? Now on from sets to individual locomotives. Here's the J72 in northeastern and BR livery, but not LNER, oddly enough. And here's the Warship Diesel with working headcode lights. And here's the Jubilee class. I do have several of these, including one converted for 3-rail running. More pictures of the Jubilees as sold by Mainline. Bachmann subsequently continued these models with somewhat improved mechanisms, and Bachmann did eventually make Jubilees that didn't have split chassis. The Colette 060 in GWR and BR livery. The rebuilt Patriot class. I'm fond of the Patriot class, also sometimes known as Baby Scots, but as with the Royal Scots, I prefer to run them in their original unrebuilt condition, so I don't use these mainline models. The GWR Manor class, also designed by Colette. I spanned the page here as the main picture went across it. More detail on the mainline Manor class available in GWR and BR livery. The Coco Diesel. And now on to coaches. These are from after my modelling time, being introduced by BR, although I've certainly ridden in them in real life. More BR coaches. And BR restaurant cars in different liveries. Now we're back to something that I do run, LMS 57-foot coaches. I have several of these mainline models, which are really quite handsome. More 57-foot coaches in LMS livery and in Blood and Custard BR livery. And on to wagons, of which Mainline produced quite a range. Quite a variety of wagons produced by Mainline, and I have quite a few of them where they fit my prototype. More varieties of wagons. And yet more assorted wagon models. And even more wagons, but I'm pretty sure I have some Mainline wagons that are not shown in this catalogue. And 50-foot full brakes, for some reason listed after the wagons. I do have examples of these, although they were introduced a bit late for my preferred running prototype. And on to track accessories, gated and barrier level crossings, uncoupler, buffer and railer. I didn't really know that Mainline sold their own track system. Now I have some examples of it, so I'll perhaps get round to trying it out, but just on a temporary basis, not on a layout as such. And the back of the manual features these rather interesting pages which suggest how one might make up properly trains from the various Mainline rolling stock. I think this is quite a worthwhile idea. I do certainly give some thought to making up my own trains, although there are limits as to how realistic it's possible to be. And here we get to the building kits. Again, I had no idea that Mainline featured these. These kits were apparently made by Gilmore, but then I've never heard of Gilmore either, so these kits will be all new to me. Apparently quite a range was available. And that's all for the Mainline 1980 catalogue. Here are all of the card parts sheets that came with my set. I'm unclear as to whether these represent all of one kit or parts of more than one set. I got two of the sheet in the middle here. These all seem to be for station buildings. I also got 3 sheets apparently for building curved platforms with different surfaces. This was pretty much all there was in the way of instructions for the card kits. 2 of the sheets were labelled as building a Didcot station building. I couldn't find a picture of a real station building that these might be supposed to represent. It doesn't help that Didcot is now a major railway museum. This sheet is apparently made to represent Charlbury Station. I was able to find this picture of the real Charlbury Station, not exactly like the model, but definitely similar. This was also a Great Western station. I realised when I came to try to open the box that there was also info on the bottom. Here's more info on the steam sound system, which I shall be intrigued to try out, and pictures again of the controller and the re-railer. Here's the box with the lid opened. I'm still not quite clear how the re-railer is supposed to assemble and be used. I suppose the piece at top right is also part of the re-railer, or is that for the level crossing? The controller is quite strange. It doesn't have any control lever or dial as we would normally expect for regulating the speed. There's just a switch for minimum speed, half speed and full speed, and an on-off switch, rather an odd arrangement. Given that this is made for UK mains, I probably won't use it at all, although I do have a box to convert 110 volt supply to 240 volts, so I could try it out. Here are the gates for the level crossing and painted crew figures for the loco. And here are the loco, the tender and one of the coaches. Here's a close-up of the loco. As I say, this is the Royal Scot as rebuilt and preserved, with tapered boiler and double chimney, so it doesn't represent the engine as it ran in the 20s and 30s. Here's the tender, no sign on the outside of the sound system, which is supposedly incorporated. And here are the other 2 coaches, and I guess that's another paper about the sound system behind the bottom coach there. And here's some track and what I assume to be part of the re-railer. I'm not really intending to use this track, but I may connect it and try it out if I can find somewhere to do that. So that's it for now. More on this set probably soon, at least an attempt to run the rolling stock and see if I can get the sound system to work.